The UFC is price gouging fans across the board while they can't even sell out an arena. UFC Perth this weekend is struggling to sell tickets to the point where they have started discounting them. And this comes during the same week that TKO CEO Mark Shapiro said that they are seeking site fees for all events going forward and that there is no difference between the Apex. Now, is the UFC tanking certain ticket sales and saving big fights for the new deal with Paramount Plus? Or is CEO of TKO Mark Shapiro slowly running the UFC into the ground? Stick around to hear the full story. I'm Wyatt, and this is Fight Society. Okay, so here we have a story from the local news in Australia, 7 News Australia, saying that the arena is now only half sold and the tickets are being discounted for UFC Perth this weekend with the main event of Carlos Ulberg and Dom Reyes.
Financial investment in cage fighting is in question tonight, with poor ticket sales to a UFC event this weekend. UFC Fight Night is being staged at RAC Arena, but the venue is only about half full and tickets are now being discounted.
The response to UFC's return visit to Perth this year has been disappointing, not the sellout of previous years.
There's a lot happening that weekend. Of course, the AFL Grand Final, a lot happening around the nation.
But it seems there's more to it than just being up against a grand final on a long weekend. Builders Fight Night, the main event between Carlos Ulberg and Dominick Reyes, is not a title fight. The supporting card seen as not comparable to previous UFC events. One of the big appeals of events like UFC is the large viewing audience it brings in through pay-per-view. But Fight Night is not a pay-per-view event, meaning a much smaller international viewing audience. The opposition is questioning why the government would pour taxpayers' money into a second-tier event that won't have the same level of interstate or overseas interest.
If it's costing them next to nothing and they're not selling any tickets, well, in that case, it might be fine. But we don't know what it's costing. So how can we make those judgment calls?
The price of tickets is already being heavily discounted ahead of Sunday's event.
This is a huge opportunity for the fans that have missed out on the other pay-per-view events in Perth to experience the UFC in Perth, which is always a good experience.
Jeff Parry, 7 News.
So the local government is being criticized for their investment in the UFC. And that's because the tickets aren't selling. And the UFC seeks site fees for these events, where that means the local government is cutting a check to the UFC just for coming to the town because it generates business locally because of hotels, travel, eating out, all of those type of things. The UFC calls on site fees to go to different arenas. And the reason that these tickets are not selling, as you can see right here, a lot of open seats, over half the arena has availability. And you can sit very close, very, very close for $200 to $250, which is pretty unheard of for a UFC event. I remember I went to UFC Seattle and I sat way, way, way up here, somewhere like that, like a comparable seat to that in Seattle. And it was about $200 or $220 per seat. Now, the reason that this is interesting is because CEO of TKO, Mark Shapiro, has been talking about the site fees that UFC collects, the exact thing that's being criticized in that news clip. If we've got a St. Louis up against a Des Moines, Iowa, if you want us to go back there, you've sold out and broken records in both of our arenas, you'll have to pay us to come back, or else we'll take it to another town. Now, this is really interesting because they're asking for top dollar for tickets from the fans. They also want money from the local government, even though they can't sell out, as we've seen. And we also have the UFC coming up on a $1 billion deal with Skydance Corporation, also known as Paramount Plus, $7.7 billion with a B for 7 years just for their broadcasting. They're asking for top dollar from the fans to even get into the event, like unaffordable prices. And then we also have the site fees when they can't even sell out an arena. And it's getting to this point where I can't decide if the UFC is trying to spite ESPN in their last few months, because ESPN is trying to spite UFC fans. The ESPN is trying to squeeze just a couple more dollars out of UFC fans by increasing the prices from $11.99 to $12.99 with about 2.5 months left of the UFC ESPN deal. Quick break. If you're loving this video and you want more from Fight Society, click that join button down below to become a channel member today, where you'll get access to members only live streams, behind the scenes vlogs, and all the unfiltered stuff that we don't post to the main channel. Back to the video. This event is not selling out because you have a lackluster card. You have Carlos Ulberg against Dominick Reyes in the main event. Not a bad fight night main event at all. Actually, a pretty good fight night main event. But Jimmy Crute, Ivan Erslan is the co-main. Jack Jenkins in the feature fight. Jake Matthews, Neil Magny, that's not bad. Justin Taffa, Louis Sutherland, Tom Nolan, Charlie Campbell, and then it just drops off a cliff from there. I mean, some reputable names: Navajo Sterling, Andre Petrosky, Oban Elliott, Jamie Malarkey. Colby Thicknessy is Volk's teammate. We have a few people in here that are good. This is a good fight as well. Alexia Tainara against Loma Lukbunmi. These are good fights, but no name value at all that is going to bring the casual ticket buying audience. Because let's be real, the hardcore fans don't go to fights. They watch them at home. Most hardcore fans watch fights from home. I've watched a ridiculous amount of UFC events in my life. I've gone to one. And if you expect to sell out an entire, 15, 20,000 seat arena like you did with a pay-per-view with UFC 305, with UFC 312, with UFC 284, all these different pay-per-views that you've done with title fights in Australia, now you're trying to sneak this one by and probably charge similar ticket prices to what you charged in the past. The fans are not going to go for it. Also, you've probably overtapped that market. And this leads me to believe that we have a very greedy corporation now running the UFC, with that being TKO. It's showing that that is not necessarily paying off, because many people gave the TKO president, Mark Shapiro, quite a bit of flack when he said that the Apex shows are no different than the shows that they do in arenas with fans. He said that there is no difference and our profit margin could be higher. And so when you hear things like that, you're like, okay, they're only driven on money. Okay, fine. They make a lot of money. They want to make more of it. I guess it makes sense. It's a free country, whatever. But then when you look into the fact that things like the UFC Netflix deal fell apart. Why didn't Netflix go with UFC? And it says because they didn't want the fight night slop. They wanted, as you can see, if you read the article, wanted the numbered pay-per-view cards. They did not want the fight night slop. And that's the type of shit we're talking about, is when you say there's no difference between the Apex events and arena shows, when there's a very clear difference. You're showing the fans that you don't care about them, and you're showing the fans, Mark Shapiro, that you really don't know anything about the sport. And he has a whole lot more pull than Dana White in the UFC at this point when it comes to those business decisions. Not booking fights or anything like that, but margins, profits, locations, all that type of thing. But it seems hypocritical when a year and a half ago, he was saying, when we are in the Apex in front of a couple hundred people, it's just not the same experience. And we're not getting that touch, and we get that feedback. Fast forward to about a year later, less than a year later, it's the exact opposite that he has to say. So why is this going on? Why is the UFC struggling to sell tickets but charging a high price? I think this is the NFL, NBA courtside ticket equivalent to MMA. It's been a rich man's club for a long time. It's going to continue, and I think it's going to get even worse. So UFC fans, if you can find a fight night near you that is $200 for a ticket, you might as well go if it's a bucket list thing for you to see UFC fights in person, because they're going to get more expensive. They are going to want cage side seats to be $70, $80, $90, $100,000. like they are for courtside NBA playoff games and things like that. Now, the money being pumped into the sport is very beneficial, but when the people handling that money and the people running the sport don't care about the fans, don't care about a live audience, all they care about is TV production and the revenue that they're getting paid. They would rather do every fight card at the Apex, I'm telling you. They would rather do every single fight card at the Apex where they don't have to travel. It's all in-house, low budget. And even WWE did like an NXT event at the Apex last year, and it got a lot of criticism from even the wrestlers that participated. So TKO, their greediness, their sole focus being on the bottom line, profit margins, and not the actual fans of this sport that built this sport when it was heavily criticized, taboo, people like Dana White who stuck their neck out time and time again for the sport's advancement, sold it off to a corporation to sit here and exploit the fans, exploit the cities that they go to, and exploit the fighters. I hate to be that guy again talking about fighter pay, but we have seen nothing except for a little bit of talk about increased bonuses to show that this nearly doubling in broadcasting revenue for the UFC is going to mean anything for the fighters at all. So I hope that the UFC heads in the right direction with this new streaming deal. The UFC White House next year, new streaming deal on free TV, CBS. The popularity will blow up, but I just hope that this TKO organization does not squeeze the life out of the sport that we all love so much. Let me know your thoughts down below. Do you want more from Fight Society? Like and subscribe below this video and click the join button to become a channel member today to get access to behind the scenes vlogs and members only live streams.